All right, everybody, welcome back.
We are here, finally. We have come back to talk about how in the world we got here. In case you forgot.
We still don't know, really, how we got here. Since Uganda, it's been a little chaotic.
I feel like life is just like, blah.
Like what?
Yeah, like that. Like I sound like a teenage boy. That's what I sounded like just then. But I just feel like that's what it's been like since we got back. Like, I don't know which direction I'm going or like... Yeah, what's going on? I don't even know what day it is still.
It's like a lot of routines haven't returned to normal.
What did Braun say the other day? He's like, you guys have been back for like 2 months.
It feels like we've been back for about a week.
Yeah.
We're still discombobulated from
chaotic.
But I think the trip like shook things up in a good way. Like,
yeah,
it got us thinking about a lot of stuff, and the Lord has been speaking and working.
Yeah. I wonder if like working for Rowan now has made it seem like we've never left Uganda. Like,
yeah.
So like part of us is still running on Uganda time, and for like certain things that we're working on now, and I'm like, maybe we're just like all shook up because it feels like we're still part of Rowan, which we are now.
Yeah, we've started working for the U.S. sponsorship team, so sending out a lot of sponsor letters, communicating with the Uganda team.
Yeah.
So I think it does kind of feel like we're still there.
Yeah, because we're just all over the place still.
Yeah,
we haven't figured out schedules.
Connected to Uganda.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, that's my thought.
Okay, great.
I think we have a lot of catching up to do, even just like for ourselves. Like I feel like we haven't like just sat and talked. Like about anything that's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, we have, but we haven't.
We haven't even gone to the gym together for like a month.
I know, this is what feels so weird. Like we're a little disconnected. But anyways, yeah, I think like since going to Uganda, like life is a little chaotic, and I feel like we still haven't found a good rhythm on my side yet anyways, because I feel like my eyes were open to so many things in Uganda that I'm like, really good things, like that I want to change in my life. And, you know, so it's brought me into a whole nother season. And I think that's what like change feels chaotic sometimes and it feels uncomfortable. And so I think that's where like, I'm like, life has been crazy and chaotic. And it's because like, things are changing, and I can feel that like seasons are changing and we're going into different directions, and like, oh my gosh, like one of the things that I learned or I felt like my eyes were open to in Uganda is like in the United States, particularly, maybe just in my life, I don't know, like we do a lot of things that are like unimportant and unnecessary, and there's a lot of like rushing around and being on a schedule that really it does not do anything for life, like or like for kingdom life. Does that make sense? Like there are so many things that I feel like I try to fit into my daily schedule that like ultimately do not do anything for the kingdom of heaven. And I feel like that part of what I'm trying to do now is to cut out the things that I'm rushing to and doing that are not building the kingdom of heaven. And because like in Uganda, there's no time schedule. There's no like they're not like, oh, we have to be at this place at this time and we have to do this. And like, if you don't make it, okay, great.
Yeah.
That's
it'll start
fine
when everybody arrives.
Yeah. And so that's like part of me is just like, wow, like they have like a much different lifestyle. And I think it's much closer to the lifestyle that, you know, they lived in the Bible times. Like, it wasn't so structured and it wasn't so like put together, and you don't have to seem put together. So that's what like one of the things that I'm like talking about as seasons changes and things are changing is like I realize that we do a lot of stupid things here that mean nothing, and like if I cut some of those out, I would have more time to spend with the Lord, number one, or in things that He wants me to do to build His kingdom.
Yeah, and even like the drive to be busy, they don't have that in Uganda.
Right.
They're not concerned with having to be doing something all the time. And I think coming back here after being in Uganda, it's like, wow, that is so different. Like, I feel like I have to be busy all the time, and there's always this pressure to be involved in everything and to always be accomplishing something. Or,
and it's our culture. Like, that's the culture we live in. Like, their culture is completely different. Yeah. And, like, I feel like that's, like, maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like that's the culture that the Lord wants us to live in, is like that it doesn't have, we don't have to be driven by society to do the things
Yeah.
and to be the things and to like run a successful business or have a successful job. Like none of that matters there. And that's kind of, I feel like, what the kingdom of heaven looks like. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're building it, like building his kingdom.
Yeah. So. And even asking the Lord in each like season of your life, like, what are your priorities for me right now? Like, one cool thing that you've done since we've been back that I think is amazing is the Lord was calling you to be home at dinner time and to cook dinner for your family every night. And like, there's still sports and there's still stuff, but that's where he's asking you to be. And even at youth group Thursday night, we had an incredible speaker named Lena, and she was saying, you don't need to know the full plan for your life. Just follow the Lord step by step. Like, ask him what he wants for you. What are you leading me into? What's your heart in this season? That sounded so Christianese, and I apologize, but it's just the truth. Like, it is really the truth. Yeah. Like, what do you want me to focus on? And is there something that I need to shift in order to do that? And then often we don't see the reason. Like, maybe you don't know why you're supposed to be home for dinner, but that's what the Lord said, so you're going to do it. Exactly. Like, even though there's like, it makes no sense sometimes to be home to make dinner because we live 12 miles out of town, where everything happens. And so, like, I'm just, like, telling Kelsey, like, I don't think I can work out anymore, or at least not in the evenings, you know, because, like, I need to run home for an hour, cook dinner, and then come back to town. Yeah. Like, because they're, like, in the hustle and bustle of what we are doing in life, in the fact that we have small group and we have volleyball and we have track or whatever may be going on, in that hustle and bustle, I feel like the Lord is asking me to take that time out and specifically dedicate it to honoring my family. And it actually has slowed the pace of things. Like, even though I feel like I'm rushing back and forth, like, going home, like, being, like, grounded and at home has slowed the pace of life a little bit, where I'm like, oh, like, we can just, like, come together real quick, eat a meal, and then go back out. Even though it feels fast, it's really slowed things down, I feel like. So it's kind of interesting. That's really cool. I saw something on Instagram the other day that said the easiest way to regulate your nervous system is to slow your body down. Like, whatever you're doing, just, like, do it so slow, and it resets your brain somehow. But I think the same is true for your schedule. Like, taking a step back, driving home, making a meal, sitting down with your family, like, that's a way to regulate your whole system. Like, telling your body, okay, we're taking time to slow down. Yeah. And we're taking a rest, and we're taking a Sabbath, and even if it's an hour a day. Right. My kids think it's fun and crazy sometimes that we're eating dinner at 5 p.m. when they get off the bus from school, but I'm like, I don't know. Like, and I was telling Braun the other day, I was like, I don't know what's in this, but I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So, anyways, that's one little thing I brought back from Uganda. Yeah. Cool. What about you? Life updates with you? Yeah, I'm back into the swing of work and tutoring and everything. I feel like what Uganda did for me, I feel like it was really a gift from the Lord, because I felt like there was a part of my heart that came alive in Uganda again, and being in Zambia with my mom in August did this too, but just realizing, like, I don't know, there's something about identity, like, that I do feel really alive in contexts like that. And so I think coming back, it's cool because it didn't really wear off. Like, I still, every day, I'm like, that's the life that I want. Like, I want to be, I don't know, in situations that aren't always the easiest, but feel very comfortable to me. Right. Like, I feel very alive in it. And so it's been cool to bring that back with me and kind of live knowing, like, there's two parts to myself. There's, like, my Africa self and there's my American self, and I actually can be both. And being one doesn't mean that I leave the other behind. Yeah. So that's cool. I feel like the Lord's been talking to me a lot about living holistically, like living as a full person, whether it's, like, you know, the part of my brain that's anxious and the part of my brain that's adventurous, and merging the two. And I don't know, just merging the different parts of my life to be wholehearted. Yeah. Yeah, but it has been a little chaotic. Nice.
Yeah, so I think that Uganda, which we will eventually stop talking about Uganda, maybe never.
Not.
But I think that it, like, evoked, is that the word I'm looking for? Like, a change in both of us.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure Kelsey Hargadine too, but each time she goes, I'm sure is different. But, like, I think it just, it did implement, like, a lot of things for us that we were, like, you know, eye-opening, or that the Lord showed us. And I think Uganda was really great. But now, like, coming back to life, we're like, okay, how do we implement what you've showed us? And, like, and I think it has, like, stirred change. And there's a lot of change happening around us.
Yeah.
So
I feel like the trip, but, like, this, just the time of life we're in is kind of a catalyst where, like, people's perspectives are changing. It feels like situations are changing. It feels like things are shifting a lot. And so that's part of why it feels like life hasn't gone back to normal since Uganda, because I feel like the Lord is doing something new. Yeah. Here and there.
And when the Lord does something new, he doesn't necessarily show you what it looks like. So I think that's why everything seems so chaotic, because we're like, Lord, what are you doing? You know, where are you in this? Although we can feel him in it and we know it's happening, but it's like, just show us something.
Please,
like,
anything.
Anything. Like, even just a tiny glimpse of a roadmap or something, like, of where we're going. Because, change is hard. Yeah. And, like, when you don't know what it looks like in the end, it's a little intimidating. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I was reading in Romans 4 the other day, kind of connected to how changes... It feels uncomfortable, and you just don't know what's going to remain constant and if God will actually keep his promises. And that can be a scary place to be when you're like, I know what you've told me, Lord. Is that still going to happen? Is that still the plan when it looks like everything is kind of shifting?
Right. Yeah, and then we can talk more about this later, but we were talking at ladies group today, like what it looks like to be unoffended when you feel like the Lord's not coming through on his plan, or what you thought was his plan. Yeah. Or so that's something to ponder too in that, because I'm sure we've all been a little bit hurt or offended when we felt like the Lord hasn't come through. But I thought I would read Romans 4:16 through the end. So here we go. And I am in the NLT. So the promise is received by faith. It is given as a free gift, and we are all certain to receive it, whether or not we live according to the law of Moses, or if we have faith like Abraham's. For Abraham is the father of all who believe. That is what the scriptures mean when God told him, I have made you a father of many nations. This happened because Abraham believed in God, who brings the dead back to life, and who creates new things out of nothing. I'm going to read that again. This happened because Abraham believed in the God who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing. I feel like there's so much to that. Like, the God who makes new things out of nothing. Like
we're talking about the season of change.
Yeah, like when you think things are nothing, the Lord is doing something in it.
Like reviving something that you thought would never live again.
Yeah.
And also creating something completely new.
Yeah, like living without a job, or, you know, like, I don't know, where you think there's nothing.
Yeah, or even hope that's died.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to life.
Gosh. Okay, continuing on, verse 18. Even when there is no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations. For God had said to him, that's how many descendants you will have. And Abraham's faith did not weaken, even though at about 100 years of age, he figured his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb. Abraham never wavered in believing God's promises. In fact, his faith grew stronger, and in this he brought glory to God. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. And because of Abraham's faith, God counted him as righteous. And when God counted him as righteous, it wasn't just for Abraham's benefit. It was recorded for our benefit too, assuring us that God will also count us as righteous if we believe in him, the one who raised Jesus, our Lord, from the dead. He was handed over to die because of our sins, and he was raised to life to make us right with God. Like, there's so much to that. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promised.
Isn't that good?
How were you fully convinced? Like, that's just what I want to know.
Yeah,
like,
especially because he literally slept with his slave woman. Well, I guess that was Sarah's idea. I don't know. There's a lot
to that, but it's just like, I want to know how you are fully convinced, because to me, fully convinced doesn't look like, oh, God might do this, or he might come through, in this way. That's not what fully convinced looks like. And a lot of times I feel like we think we're living fully convinced, like we think we fully believe in healing, but we're really just like, oh, we're going to pray for so-and-so and hope that it happens. Like, how did Abraham become fully convinced that the Lord was going to come through with his promises?
Yeah, and it's his faith that's commended over and over again. Like, this part of Romans is talking all about how people aren't justified by, like, following the law, but by their faith, and that Abraham had faith before he even, like, the sign of the covenant was circumcision, but he had faith before that, and it was the faith that made him righteous, which is such a cool way to think about it. And so, like, Paul is saying, how more so are we made right, regardless of if we're Jewish or not, because we have the faith of Abraham, who became a friend of God. Like, God literally called him a friend. Just wild. So I was reading this.
Just, like, so crazy. I don't know. Like, I'm, like, thinking about my own life. I'm like, well, yeah, a lot of the times I'm like,
I'm sort of convinced.
Yeah. It's like when I tell my kids, well, don't worry, the Lord's going to come through. And they're like, yeah, we know that. And I'm like,
do you?
Do I know that?
Yeah.
Like, because I said that out of habit.
Yeah. Or out of, like, kind of, we call it faith, but it's kind of like wishful thinking. Like, oh, well, God will
provide for you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, great. And I'm like, do I believe that? I don't know. And because I said that in a doubtful way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like, I thought about this a few years ago, how I feel like when we say I'm hoping for something, a lot of times we're actually doubting for it. Like, oh, I hope it'll work out. No, you're just doubting that it will. And you're saying that you hope it'll work out. But to look at the life of Abraham, where God gave him a promise, he and his wife, that they would have descendants, have children. He's 100. It hasn't happened. I'm pretty sure there was maybe a decade in between the promise and when Isaac was born. They tried to fix it their own way, and, like, Abraham had a kid with the servant woman, and yet God still came through. And so I was thinking about all of that the other morning when I was, like, reading and journaling, and I feel like the Lord just downloaded this whole essay to me, essentially. Like, this whole written thing. Yeah. So if it's okay, I'll just read that.
Let's hear it. I'm
ready.
It's
a little lengthy, but oh well. Just get cozy.
Yes.
But the title of it is A Many-Layered Good. And God was just talking to me about how his promises are so much more complex than we realize, and his fulfillment of them will be just as beautifully complex as the promise. And even if we don't get to see it, like, our descendants will, like, our legacy, our kids and our grandkids will get to see it. So anyway, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Should I go ahead?
Did you like my cozy pose?
I love your cozy pose. Beth is locked in.
I'm ready to be fully undistracted. Sorry.
Great. All right. A many-layered good. When God promised Abraham he would be the father of many nations, Abraham was old and childless. There was absolutely no evidence of God fulfilling his promise for over a decade. Yet Abraham hoped and believed God's promise. He believed it so much that when he didn't see God acting to fulfill it, he took matters into his own hands and assumed that he had to fulfill the promise his own way. Yet God still fulfilled his original promise and worked a miracle, so that Isaac was the son of Abraham and Sarah. I bet Abraham was overjoyed to see the literal, physical promise of a son and descendants fulfilled. But the whole time, God was working quietly behind the scenes, crafting an even bigger story and weaving together a many-layered good. While Abraham rejoiced in Isaac, God had another meaning entirely for his promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations. Abraham became the father of the entire Jewish people, called and set apart by God. His faith became a model as Jews throughout history trusted in and wrestled with God. His lineage and family history got messy, but God wasn't intimidated by the mess. He still saw the promise. Centuries later, another man appeared on the scene who modeled total faith and reliance on his father. This man, a descendant of Abraham, was the bright and morning star. Remember when God told Abraham to look up at the stars and count them? That is how many descendants he would have. Abraham could have never imagined that God himself would become incarnate, the bright and morning star, and mark his appearance with a star as a guide for people to seek and find him. How creative is God? How kind and generous to not only deal with the mess and the mistakes of his people, but to work through them to create a new layer of good for his people. And not only that, the whole time God had a plan to include all people in his promise. Not only Jews, but also Gentiles, anyone who saw faith modeled and believed in his Son. In verse 17 says, "The God who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing." Abraham did become a father to Isaac and Ishmael. He got to see his children and grandchildren grow up. He caught glimpses of the nation that formed from his descendants. But God has always been a master craftsman, and he created layers of fulfillment Abraham might not have ever gotten to see. But we do. We, who are included in the promise by our faith, like Abraham's, in the one who raised Jesus from the dead. If God's promise and fulfillment for Abraham can be so expansive, so far-reaching, so beyond what Abraham could ever ask or imagine, how much more is our God doing the same thing today? How much more does he see our history, our dreams, and our pain, and weave together a story so good that only future generations could start to glimpse the full glory of it? And yet, that small, literal promise to you from the Lord, he hasn't forgotten it. Maybe it's been a decade of waiting, hoping, wondering, even being disappointed over and over. Maybe you've gotten so tired of being disappointed that you've decided to make the promise come true in your own way. I've been there too. Look at the story of Abraham. Look at how Sarah laughed in God's face in disbelief and God fulfilled his promise anyway. What if God is able to do whatever he promises? What if he is ready and willing to weave the broken parts of our story into something so good it will bless generations after us? What if the story only begins to make sense when we share it with our family, the church? And what if he really is creating a many-layered good? So that's what the Lord downloaded to me in that moment.
And I feel like that's what he's doing in a lot of people's lives. And I feel like even in our lives, like we've both, I feel like been like, oh, you know, where is the Lord in this? Or when will my promises from the Lord come true?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just so cool thinking about all the layers that, like, even Abraham and Sarah didn't get to see. And, like, the part where it quotes the one who raises the dead and creates new things out of nothing. Like, Abraham believed in that God, and then his descendant, the fulfillment of God's promise, Jesus, literally came raising the dead and making new things out of nothing. Like, he fed the 5,000 and the 4,000. He created food from nothing, like, and raised Lazarus from the dead. Like, Jesus came doing those things, and he was a descendant of Abraham. It's just so wild to me that God is thinking so far ahead, and then even us today, if we have the faith of Abraham, we're included in that.
Yeah. And like the Bible says, like, God is the same today as he was yesterday and, you know, and tomorrow. Like, it's the same God. And so if the same God, I think you said this in there, it's the same God, and he can do what he did in Abraham's life, in our lives. And why do we ever doubt that? Yeah. I mean, obviously there's so many reasons why we can doubt it, or why we can laugh in God's face and say, I think I'll just do this on my own. Like, but he's still going to do it. Like, he's still going to do what he's promised to do. I remember when I was starting the bakery, or when he gave me the dream of the bakery, he told me that it was going to be risky. And I don't like that. I don't like taking risks. I don't like that. But I remember hearing from the Lord, like, because in my mind, I was like, well, I'll just start small. I'll just start from home. I'll get it all going, and it'll be good, and then I'll build up, and then it can look risky after that. Yeah. Let me just do it this way.
Not now, though.
And I clearly remember the Lord saying, you can do what makes you comfortable if you want, but I'm still going to do what I want to do. And it's still going to be risky no matter what. I'm still going to do what I have put in you to do. And so to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's great, Lord. So what do you want me to do? Like, you can still do it your way if you want.
Yeah.
And the Lord's still going to do what he has set out to do the whole time.
Yeah.
You
like
know?
Abraham with
like
the servant girl, or maybe it was Sarah's idea. She's like, clearly this ain't happening. So
right.
I know a way to make it happen.
Exactly.
And I think, like, God isn't scared away by that moment when we decide to make it work ourselves.
Exactly.
He'll still do what he promised.
Exactly.
And it'll still look more incredible than we could even have imagined.
Right.
Yeah. I'm
just like downloading so much in my head from that. Sorry. Like, yeah. Preach. Like, amen. Like, there's just like, there's so much to that. And I feel like it just pertains to everybody. Like, there have probably been times in everyone's life where you've laughed in the face of God and said, well, see you later. I'm going to do it how I want.
Yeah.
Or
you've just been so disappointed that you're like, clearly the Lord has forgotten what he said.
Or maybe I didn't really hear him.
Right.
Maybe that was my own thought. Maybe that was something I made up on my own. That's what I do a lot of the time. So maybe that wasn't right. I didn't hear correctly on that. But then you see the Lord come through and you're like, oh, crap. I did hear him.
And it's Ephesians 3. Like, he's able to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. And yet I think sometimes, like, I do this often. I'm like, well, this is what I feel like the Lord has promised me, but that is so good. How could anything ever compare?
Right. And am I good enough for that?
Yeah. Like, am I really, do I think that I deserve that?
Yeah.
In a way?
Yeah.
But
if you think about it from a father's perspective, he just wants to give us everything. Like, as a mother, like, I don't care if my kids deserve it or not. I want to give them everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you think about it from that perspective, like, we are, and we'll always be good enough.
Yeah. And that his promise it is for us. Like, his promise was for Abraham. It was for Sarah.
This isn't just some, like, Bible time thing that is happening. Like, this has been happening through life, throughout eternity. It's not just something that stops with Abraham and he's like, yep, I fulfilled that one. I'm good. I'm going to leave you.
Yeah.
No, he's promised it to everyone who has faith.
Yeah. And the fulfillment of the promise will actually be a bigger blessing to the world, the nations, like the people that he's called us to will be blessed by the promise. And I think that was even part of the original promise to Abraham. You'll have descendants as numerous as the stars, and all the earth will be blessed through you. And then look at Jesus. Like, that, it's just wild.
Yeah. Can you read the last page of your thingy again?
What if the story only begins to make sense when we share it with our family, the church? And what if he really is creating a many-layered good?
Okay. So, like, one of, like, the questions that you asked is, what if, like, we're supposed to share it, basically. What does it look like to share, and to share it with our family, our church family, like what the Lord has promised us? And then how does he show us, like, steps or whatever pages to the promise in that? You know what I mean? Like, what does it look like to be open and vulnerable about the things that the Lord has promised you?
Yeah, even if they haven't happened.
Right.
You're in that span of time where you're like, the Lord promised this and I don't see nothing.
Well, and also, like, the fact, too, is, like, some people are always like, just don't talk about the things that the Lord's doing until he does them. You know what I mean? Or, like, you don't need to share every aspect of your life. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, like, what is it? I don't know, like you've got to step out of your comfort zone and be like, I have to share this with someone.
Yeah.
And then, like, what if they have a piece of that promise for you? Like, what if they're like, oh, actually, I have, a way to make this happen for you.
Yeah.
Or like the Lord has given me, not like we're going out and doing it on our own, but the Lord gave me this, and it's specifically for what your like promise is. I don't know.
And if you didn't share with them, you would never see the ways where our stories actually overlap and like intersect, and God is actually doing the same thing he's always been doing. Right.
Because I think that's part of this. That's part of what we're doing, right? We're sharing our story and what the Lord's promises are in us. And like, if people didn't know that, like, if people didn't know that we were struggling, like, because we all do, we're struggling with like, when is the Lord going to come through with this? Like, a lot of times we just sit and hide and think, oh, it's only me that's forgotten.
Yeah.
Oh, like, the Lord loves Kelsey and Beth so much, like, that's fine for them or whatever. But like, if we don't speak about it, if we don't talk about the hard things and what it looks like to wait on God's promises, then no one ever knows, and we don't know we're like in the same, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's often a span of years. Like, if I'm remembering the number right, it's like a decade for Abraham, but like Moses waited 40 years. Like, Jesus was 30 before he started his ministry. Like, there's always a span of waiting, and I feel like that is kind of like the crucible where you have to decide, do I believe what the Lord has said, even if I have no evidence? But then there's these moments, like the full circle moments, where years later God will bring something around, and it's like he just winks. He's like, you were thinking this would be fulfilled in such a small way. Yeah. Like, the only way that you knew how to think about this, but he like rolls out the tapestry, and you're like, oh my gosh, he was doing something bigger the whole time. And I had no idea, and I was disappointed, and I was confused, and I questioned, and I wrestled, and he still is doing it.
Yeah. And what do you do in the waiting?
Yeah. What do you do in the waiting?
Like, when you're waiting 40 years for something to be fulfilled, what do you do?
Yeah. I was reading a book, Daring to Hope, by Katie Davis. And one of the lines in there I really like is, I think Ann Voskamp actually wrote this part, shocker, in the foreword, but she said, oftentimes we want clarity, but God wants us to come closer. And I feel like that's what you do in the waiting. Like, you have to come close to God and say, this is who I know you to be. Yep. This is who I've seen you prove yourself to be over history and through time, but I don't see it for me. Yeah. And I'm going to sit in that and let it be difficult.
And I think that's where the part of community and telling others comes into play, is because, like, if I'm just sitting here doing this all on my own, I don't think I could make it. But you have your community that you talk to, and they tell you, and they speak life into you in the waiting. And that makes it less hard, I feel like. Like, when you have people that are surrounding you and helping you in the waiting. And we surround each other, right? Like, so it's not just me and everyone's pouring into me, but it's like, I can go pour into you, or you can go pour into somebody. And I think that's where, like, telling people, like, this is the promise that I think the Lord has for me, and I want you to come along with me and, like, help me through this.
Yeah, even if it feels risky. Like, this is kind of a big thing that I feel like the Lord has said, but he said it, so...
Yeah, and I feel like the things that the Lord's given us sometimes seem so crazy. Like, and so nobody wants to tell anybody. Like, I think that the Lord is going to give me $3 million, you know what I mean? Or something crazy that doesn't, like, even make sense. Yeah. But the people in your community who also believe that the Lord can do crazy, magnificent things are the ones that you're going to want to pull close to you in that time. Yeah. Because as crazy as it seems, the Lord's still going to do it.
Yeah, and I think about, too, like, the time of waiting, preparation, whatever it is. Like, when I was training for the Boulder last year, the 10K race, that was a time of waiting in between, what was it, January to May or something like that. And
a long time.
But it wasn't like I was sitting waiting for the race. Like, I was waiting for the race, but I was training for the race. And I feel like sometimes we think of waiting as just sitting, but in actuality, waiting is strengthening. It's getting into the gym. It's pushing through when you don't feel like you can do it. It's bringing a friend with you who will suffer with you, and there will be suffering in the waiting. But you'll be so much stronger when that does come true. And, like, when the race came, yeah, it sucked. There were things about it that sucked, but it was glorious. Like, it was such a good experience because I had been prepared for it.
Yeah. It's like preparing you for your promise. Like, he's not going to just give it to you because, like, I don't know, like, if I was given everything that the Lord had for me right now in this moment, would I steward that well? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he's building us up to be able and building our strength to be able to handle well what he's given us.
Yeah. Imagine if I had tried to run the boulder on day 1 of training.
Right.
Disaster. So much suffering, so much pain.
Yeah.
Like
so the waiting is very crucial because he's training us to handle well what he's given us. Because otherwise, as the human, in human nature, we wouldn't handle it well. Yeah, so say the Lord wants me to have $1 million. If he gave it to me today, I wouldn't handle it well. You know what I mean? Like, and if he gave it to me after the training period is over, it could be used to build his kingdom.
Right. Then it becomes an actual blessing and not just something that weighs you down.
Exactly.
Because you don't know what to do with it.
Yep. Yeah. Dang. So much to think about. There's just so much in here. Like, we could probably go on for hours, I feel like, about, like, waiting and I don't know. So much in my brain.
I know. It's crazy.
So, like we were talking about at women's group, like, how do you become or train to be unoffended when you think it's the right time, but the Lord doesn't? Like, because, and it is true, like, we do become offended with the Lord and we do get angry with the Lord. And, like, when we think, okay, this is the time I'm supposed to get this. This is when my promises will be fulfilled. And after this, I'll be golden and blah, blah, blah. And then it doesn't happen. How do you not get offended? And how do you, like, not become angry in that waiting process?
Yeah. So we were thinking about some questions just to ponder. And one of them is that we can all ask the Lord to remind us of a promise that he's given us, whether it's something really small and really measurable, or if it's a huge dream that he's given you and you haven't maybe seen it fulfilled yet, but just asking him to bring to mind the things that he has promised you.
Yeah. Because a lot of time, like, remembrance is important to the Lord. Like, remembering testimonies or remembering times he's come through, but, like, remembering. Like, if you've been waiting 40 years for one promise, like, I would have definitely forgotten about it by now. But, like, writing down and remembering those things that the Lord has promised to you, I feel like are so big to God's heart. Like, because he's like, okay, yeah, you still remember me. You still remember what I've told you. And we're still working on this. Yeah.
He hasn't forgotten about it.
Yeah.
In that span of waiting that feels just eternal.
Yeah, feels eternal to us, but to him, he's like, no.
Yeah. Have I told you what my college professor said?
No.
That just changed my life? Oh my gosh. It was one of the most wise things I've ever been told. But one of my college professors said to me after I graduated, and it was this weird time where my friends and I didn't know what we were doing, and we had these degrees, and now we're pursuing careers, but do we really want that? And it was just very confusing, and we didn't know what was next. And she came over for tea, which was very sweet, and she just said, you know, if a dream is not happening, it's okay to put it on the shelf, because God still cares about the dreams that we put on shelves.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so good. Like, he will pull it off the shelf and come back to it later in his timing, and it's okay just to, like, you know, still remember it, but it's okay to shelve it, and, like, it's not gonna go to waste sitting there.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, so my other question was, like, how do you become unoffended with the Lord when things don't look like we thought they would? So yeah, like, asking the Lord what those, like, promises are, and then thinking back at them, like, how do you not get offended that they're not fulfilled yet?
So much in there.
I mean, it's just, like, hours and hours of, like, contemplating the Lord's decision.
Well, this was the start of a conversation, so everybody listening can think about it, journal about it, pray, ask the
You
Lord.
can even comment if you want to share those promises with us, or if you want to share where you're at in the promise, in the waiting, or you can, I would love a good comment of like fulfilled promises.
Yes.
Like, I hope there, like, I know there's some out there that you guys can share with us. Like, share your fulfilled promise and how long it took.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love that. That would be so fun.
Yes.
And because that's part of our, like, goal here is, you know, is to talk about people's stories and how they got where they are. And it's always with the Lord, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And if you comment and, like, share something that the Lord has done, we are so open to having guests on the podcast.
Yes.
People share their stories. So let us know. And maybe
Yes.
we'll end up on the show one day.
Yeah. Okay, well, is that all we got?
I think that's all we got.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.